I'm ready to present this. Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. While we get started with some of these technical issues that we're having, I'll introduce myself. My name is Danny Majid Morales. I'm a lecturer here at the Department of Journalism Studies, and I'm going to be the person leading today's session. Oops. And now we have two presenters joining us remotely this morning. One person is joining us from Nigeria. The other person is joining us from the US, from North Dakota, where it's 4 a.m. this morning. So we are very grateful that he was able to join us today. The panel that we will be starting soon is a panel on elections and disinformation and news coverage. And the way we are going to go through this panel is I will let both of the speakers give us a quick overview of their views on the topic. And then from there, we'll have a bit of a chat on different areas. And obviously, at the end, you will have a chance to ask questions. So please, as Bina said before, feel free to ask your questions through Mentimeter. And obviously, take notes of everything that's happening, because maybe some of the things that we discussed today are going to be in the quiz competition that you are going to have tomorrow. So with that said, I will first introduce the first of our two speakers this morning, and that will be Dr. Nuhu Gapsiso, who is an associate professor of journalism and new media at the Department of Mass Communication at the University of Maiduguri in Nigeria. And he has a PhD in mass communication, and he's also an active publisher of academic articles on multiple topics related to journalism and political communication. So with that said, Dr. Gapsiso, I will let you address briefly the topic of this panel for a few minutes, and then hopefully we'll have Professor Okigbo ready on the other side. So.
Good morning. It's a pleasure being here. It's a privilege talking on political tension, disinformation, and elections in Africa. Nigeria has always had its own fair share of tension, political tension. Every election that comes up in Nigeria is characterized by political tension, disinformation, and all whatnot. Politicians always play on the gullibility of the electorate, particularly in Nigeria, where Nigerians are very passionate about their ethnic affiliation, religious affiliation. So they play on the psychology of the people in Nigeria, partly because that's the only way to enlist their support during elections. So what normally happens is, anytime there is election, people are being fed with wrong information. People are being fed with false information in order to get advantage to one party against the other. If you look at the history of Nigeria, even during the pre-colonial times, there has always been political tension. We knew how the Action Group had its tension against the Northern Alliance. So it has always been a case of distrust between politicians from all the regions in Nigeria. And the only way to get advantage over each other is to spread disinformation, false information about their opponents, because that is what people will use against them during elections. It happened in 1983 during the election of Shehu Shagari. It also happened in 1993 when late MKO Abiola election was annulled by the military. During that election, there was this disinformation about a statement that was made by Bashir Tofa, who was a leading candidate of the opposition party. At that time, Nigerians cashed in on the statement that was spread about the person of Bashir Tofa to vote massively for MKO Abiola. It happened during Buhari's first election when he contested against an incumbent. A lot of disinformation was out there And many people were forced to vote against Jonathan, partly because of the disinformation that has been in circulation, as he being the brain behind the increase in violence in the country that appears to displace quite a number of people, that led to the killing of so many people. So Nigerians voted massively against him, partly because of the information that were out there, some of whom which were not true. It is happening now. We have about 3 leading candidates of 3 political parties in Nigeria: Peter Obi of the Labour Party, Bola Tinubu of the APC, and then Atiku Abubakar of the PDP. There has been this information flying around that Peter Obi has some kind of link with IPOP. There's also this information flying around that Atiku Abubakar is corrupt, that he has been accused of corruption by the former president Olusegun Obasanjo. There's also this information flying around that Bola Tinubu is sick and therefore is not fit to be elected as the president of Nigeria. So that has somehow shaped the political landscape of the country, so much so that people rely on some of this information that are obviously not true. Some may be true, some are not true, to form a political opinion about each of the candidates. So I think this is my overview of the tension that is already in the air, the disinformation that is there in the media about all the candidates. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gapsiso, for this introduction. And while we are waiting for our other speaker to be able to join us online, let me ask you a couple of questions that I was thinking while you were telling us about your current political climate, right? In Nigeria, Nigeria is going to hold elections next year, 2023. And in some countries, there's been concern that some of the disinformation is not only coming from domestic actors, but also from foreign actors. In your view, how much of a problem this is for Nigeria? We've seen in other parts of the region, I'm thinking of the Sahel region, for example, where French and Russian are engaging in disinformation campaigns. Is this type of foreign influence a problem for Nigeria?
I think in the case of Nigeria, to the best of my knowledge, most of the architects of this disinformation are living within the country, although we have few Nigerians in the diaspora that also help in spreading disinformation about some of these political parties, about some of these candidates. But I think the majority of the disinformation emanates from this country, because most citizens have followed up with the activities of these politicians, about the activities of these political parties. So they're abreast with whatever policy, whatever programs they've been engaging. They've been scrutinizing their lives as political leaders, as politicians. So they have quite a number of information, because they are on social media space, on WhatsApp, on Twitter, on Facebook. So most of them get some of this information from many of these social media platforms. And they tend to believe it because sometimes the information is spread by people they regard as opinion leaders, people upon whom they rely upon for information on political activities in this country. So they believe them, they trust them. So they use that information against political parties, against political candidates to take a decision as to who to vote for during election.
So if foreign disinformation is probably not the biggest threat for the Nigerian case and the upcoming elections, who do you think are those actors involved in the disinformation space? Is it political parties themselves? Is it operatives from outside the political space? Who is it that's involved in the process of creating disinformation and spreading it around the country, in your view?
Politicians are the major culprit in this case, because they want to give undue advantage to their political parties. So most of them are the architect of this disinformation, particularly the spokesperson of the leading presidential candidates. Each of them would like to be seen to be taking the political landscape. So the only way they could achieve that is to spread disinformation about the other political parties, about the other candidates, so that their candidates will have the advantage over the other candidates, so that when it is time for elections, people will come out in mass and vote massively for the candidate of their choice. I blame the political parties for the spread of disinformation that is prevalent in Nigeria.
You've been mentioning social media as a primary source of this information, but I'm also thinking, does the mainstream media, traditional legacy media, TV, print, radio, also play a role, particularly given that to a certain extent, quite a few Nigerians are still relying on these sources of information to get the news?
Yeah, they do, even though I mentioned the social media platform, but people still rely on the traditional media for information on politics, on political activities taking place in the country, particularly the BBC, especially in northern Nigeria. People rely mostly on information they hear from the BBC. And sometimes the key actors that are interviewed by the BBC appear to be people that shape opinion mostly in Nigeria. So when people hear these people say stuff about political parties, about other candidates, they tend to believe everything that is being said by them in any of these conventional media outfits. Yeah, they rely on the traditional media for information on most of these politicians and political parties that tend to shape their own opinion about these politicians, about these political parties, that sometimes inform whatever electoral decision they will make in electing candidate they believe that have the capacity to deliver the art of governance to them.
You mentioned that the BBC still has a role in the media space in Nigeria. Why do you feel that there's this level of trust in what the BBC produces compared to other local media? Do you think that BBC is more trusted than other sources? And if so, why would you think that is happening?
Well, I think in the north, most of the people who live in the rural areas have access to radio and they listen to BBC a lot. So they trust even the BBC more than most of the conventional media houses we have in Nigeria. As far as they're concerned, whatever is said on BBC is the whole truth, nothing but the truth. That is their own perception, partly because maybe of their level of education, partly because of the long years of associating with BBC through listening to BBC's program, and partly because BBC transmits its programs, especially one that is meant for this country in Hausa, which is predominantly spoken in the northern Nigeria. But I cannot say the same of other parts of Nigeria. But for the north, I know that is what is happening. And for you, for every politician that wants to contest for an election, that wants to win election, must always count on the northern votes, because majority of the people live in the north, and people that live in the north sometimes determine who becomes the president because of their population, the massive population that are here in the north. So I think that explains why we could say their opinion matters in matters of deciding who governs the country or not.
Maybe you could give us, for some of our students here in the room who might not, or I don't know, maybe you're all experts on Nigerian politics, but in case they are not very familiar with the situation in Nigeria, could you give us a quick overview on why you're saying that there's a divide between the north and the south, and what are the markers of this divide in Nigeria?
there has always been northern and southern divide. In fact, we blame it on the colonialists because of the unequal partitioning of Nigeria. If you look at the size of the north, you look at the size of the south. The size of the north is almost twice or three times the size of the south. So even when the colonialists came, the kind of system they use in administering Nigeria, the one in the north is quite different from the one in the south. And if you look at even prior to independence, those in the south, motion was moved by Anthony Enahoro for Nigeria to be granted independence by 1958. But it was kicked. It was kicked by people of northern extraction who were members of the National Assembly. And that led to an altercation between the then Governor General McPherson and then Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who led that altercation was what informed the establishment of the Western Nigerian Television Authority by late Chief Obafemi Awolowo. That divide has always been there. It did not start today. It continued after independence. We look at even the immediate and remote causes of the collapse of the First Republic was partly because of that rivalry between the North and the South.
I'm seeing Professor Okigbo saying hello on the chat. So let me see if he can hear me or hear us. Professor Okigbo, we saw your camera briefly earlier. I'm not sure. You can hear me. That's fantastic. But we can still not hear you for some reason that I am, and you can see Nuhu. That's great, but we cannot hear you. So I wonder whether we might have an issue with your microphone. So
try speaking. It looks like it might be working.
Okay, can you speak for a second, Charles? Did he say hello? But I don't think we heard anything. You're speaking, okay. But for we're trying hard, but we are not hearing you. Okay, so yeah. But I cannot do anything about the microphone here, I think.
I think talking to the settings is the
Yeah.
option.
So can we try this, Charles? On the bottom of your screen, there's a purple arrow. If you click on it, you will have the settings menu, and you get my settings icon at the very bottom, which looks We heard from Nuhu, and we were not seeing you then. But let me put this question to you, and maybe you can give us your thoughts on the current situation in the Nigerian context and the problem of disinformation for Nigeria for a few minutes, and then we'll get into this dialogue that we were having with Nuhu.
Has continued all through that time to the present, which is what Nuhu was trying to explain. Negative news making, particularly against their opponents. And in doing this, they often come up with false rumors, false accusations, and false information, which are deliberately propagated to cause harm to the opponent and enhance their own political careers. Elections in Africa, as I said before, they are a foreign importation. And since independence, many African countries have been trying to see how they could indigenize politics and elections and in a way make them more attuned to African culture. It hasn't worked well. In the 60s, we had waves of political independence, but they all frittered away in the 70s and 80s through military interventions. It's only in the 90s and in the new millennium that we are now experimenting with new political arrangements, very often more tuned to American system of governance than the British parliamentary system. So today, many of the 54 countries in Africa are engaged in various stages of political transformation, going from what they inherited from their from their colonial masters to a new regime that is not truly African, but at the same time doesn't reflect the successful political transitions of their colonial masters. So you could say we are in limbo. We are not truly African in the sense of exercising African political arrangements. And we are no longer colonized. And so we are not doing our politics as it's done in Britain or as it's done in the US. I see us as in limbo, going between what we inherited and moving towards what we hope will be authentically African. So I'm optimistic, even though many of my colleagues are negatively inclined in their assessments of the political climate. In my view, I think we are growing, even though at a very slow pace. But there is no doubt that the future will be better than the present. And with time, we'll be more politically mature and probably evolve typically African political systems. Again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my experiences with you today.
Thank you, Professor, for these very interesting opening remarks. And let me pick up on one of the topics that you raised in your opening remarks about obviously the colonial legacy of Nigeria. And I was thinking, we tend to think of disinformation as a very recent phenomenon, but colonial regimes were characterized by disinformation, right? And disinformation was ripe during much of the colonial period. So why do you think that we've forgotten about this past of disinformation and we always link it to disinformation?
Yeah, you're right that disinformation is not a new phenomenon. It has always been there. And in fact, you could even say it wasn't imported by our colonial masters. In our traditional African communication systems, we do engage in disinformation. We tell lies, we use propaganda, we try to highlight the best aspects of our own experiences, and we try to publicize the negative aspects of our enemies, even in traditional settings. So disinformation wasn't exported from or imported from Britain or the colonial masters. It's always part of human nature, and it's not just between African countries and their colonial masters. We have it in the US, and we have it everywhere. Wherever you have people communicating, there is the tendency for them to protect their type, and by so doing, sometimes they engage in disinformation, which is using information for falsehood, trying to express what is not necessarily true in the interest of whoever is benefiting from the situation. So as you are right, it's not a new phenomenon. And the social media that is so prevalent in Africa and many other parts of the world now makes it much easier for us to engage in disinformation. Because with legacy media, with the traditional media, there are gates through which a story must pass through, from the reporter to the sub-editor to the editor, and in some cases, the publisher, exerting some influence. Well, with the social media, there is no gate between your cell phone and the wide public. And so it's easy for us to disseminate disinformation materials more easily today because there are limited checks and balances.
Let me ask both of you about your thoughts on what are the possible solutions to this challenge that we're facing, right? So you think of the case of Nigeria. Earlier this year, the government banned Twitter for several months because they were unhappy about President Buhari being kicked out, banned or suspended from the platform for a bit. Nigeria has pioneered several laws trying to conscribe the amount of circulation of fake news. What are your thoughts on the solutions that Nigeria has put together so far? And is there anything that's working and not working? And I'll start with Professor Okigbo, and then I'll go with Dr. Gapsiso.
I was going to suggest you start with Nuhu since he's there in Nigeria, but I can take a stab at it. But I will defer to Nuhu on this topic. I think the Nigerian government has been grappling with many problems, particularly in the area of information and communication. And the solutions the government proposes are usually not well thought out, because the government hasn't been hasn't surrounded itself with competent professionals. The information and communication machineries are managed by politicians. They wouldn't appoint a professional who is not a party member. So the primary consideration for appointment is party membership, primarily. And therefore, they haven't benefited from excellent knowledge that is out there about how we can manage disinformation and misinformation. But in my view, the situation gets worse because there is pervasive ignorance. The level of education is not high enough yet. And then for most part of the year, the schools, particularly universities, are closed because lecturers are on strike. So the high level of ignorance, the pervasive ignorance among the public, makes it easy for disinformation to hold sway. Secondly, there is the primordial instinct among Nigerians, not just Nigerians, but Africans. We are very tribalistic people. In fact, just by our last names, you can tell our tribes. And in many African societies, the tribe still holds sway more than the nation state. And therefore, if my tribesperson says anything, even if I know it might not be true, I will tend to give it more credence than if the same thing was said by somebody else. So in my view, these two factors, pervasive ignorance arising from our low level of education, and then the primordial instinct of always thinking that my tribes people are better than any other tribes people, these two factors make it easy for us to thrive on disinformation. But I will respect Nuhu's views on this because he is there and feels it every day.
Let's see. Do I have to do something to get Nuhu on camera, Jesse? Or Nuhu, can you say something? Because there's so many screens here that I am a bit lost right now. Where exactly do I go? Oh, I maybe can.
Yeah, you know, the government earlier this year banned Twitter, blamed for spearheading. So yeah, you know, the reasons the government gave, even though it's true, but government cannot also absolve itself from blame, partly because even the information managers on the side of government are also responsible for spreading disinformation out there. We have sitting governors spreading disinformation. We have sitting ministers lying in front of cameras on national TV. You know, so yeah, so for the government to now come out and say they're banning Twitter for providing a platform for spreading of disinformation, fake news, is amazing, because he who lives in glass houses should not throw stones. Government is also a culprit. So if we must fight disinformation, we have to start from ourselves. The government should put itself of disinformation, then it can come out clean to say, okay, citizens are using this platform to spread disinformation. So we should find a way of regulating the platform so that Nigerians can get credible information from this platform. But no, government feels that whenever the opposition, anybody that is opposing government policies and programs, they see him as an agent of disinformation, as agent of fake news, as somebody that is spreading hate speech. That is why Nigeria kicked against the banning of Twitter in Nigeria. For goodness sake, the Constitution has given us the right to hold opinion, impact ideas without interference. So why should we be denied that constitutional responsibility of holding opinion, impacting ideas without interference. So I think it was not right, it was not proper for government to have banned Twitter. So if government wants to check disinformation, it has to start from within itself. Watch itself. We can as well stop citizens from spreading disinformation. So I think the government is to blame, partly for the spread of disinformation. If government agents, government appointees, government elected government officials can come on air and lie to the public, why should we stop the citizens from doing the same? Just like my distinguished professor just said, uh, the challenge we have in Nigeria is for politicians that don't even have an ideology. Somebody is coming out to contest for an elective office, hinging it on the fact that it is my right, it is my time, I must be president. He has no clear-cut policies that he is bringing on board. He has no vision. He has not designed any program that he intends to carry out during a given period. Rather, he's playing on the psychology of the people. They leverage mostly on ethnic patronage and then religious patronage. In fact, most of them rely more on ethnic religious patronage than any other informed opinion that will guide them whenever they're elected into office. We've borrowed democracy from the developed world, but it's not every aspect of it that we've decided to make use of in our country, partly because you have people that think that they've been born to rule. You have politicians that would not like to leave office even when the electorate decides otherwise. There's absence of internal democracy in most of the parties. Candidates are imposed on parties. Candidates that are not popular find their way. Courts decide the fate of some states. Governors that were not elected are put in charge of affairs by courts, partly because there is no understanding between the politicians. I think a way forward is for our politicians to realize that when you are not wanted, when you have nothing to offer, then there's no point for you to come out and say you contest for an elective office. You must have something to offer before coming out to contest for any elective office. And I keep saying it, that the kind of democracy we are practicing in Nigeria, we were colonized by Britain. We would have gone with the parliamentary system of government, where we imported the presidential system of government that is quite expensive for a struggling economy as ours. And the fact that the presidential system of government concentrates too much power in the hands of one individual is what is making the office so attractive, so competitive, that people could do all within their power to ensure that they get to that office. And that gives rise to the political tension that we are experiencing, the disinformation that is prevalent in Africa. I think religion has helped health matters in Nigeria, partly because people use religion, not partly because they feel is a way to salvation. They use religion to just further their interest, partly because people who claim to be religious are the brain behind most of the crises, most of the challenges we have as a country. Of course, they know that one part of the country is so much passionate about religion, so they use it to sway voters onto their side. Because when you bring up the issue of religion, as far as they're concerned, I don't care whether the person I'm going to elect into office will deliver or not, because he belongs to the same religious group as me. I will vote him in. And that is the bane of our problem. And that is the challenge we have now, particularly now that you have the other party presenting same-faith ticket, and other people are now saying, no, we will not accept it. So it has been creating problem. You have people that say, we don't care whether it's same-faith ticket, we are going to vote them in. As far as we are concerned, they belong to us, they are part of our religion. So whether they deliver or not, it doesn't matter, so long as they will go there and protect my religion. So I will vote them in. I think religion is also responsible for the kind of challenges that we have. Not necessarily because they want to prepare the minds of people to embrace the religious teachings to work for the betterment of the country. Nigeria is the most religious country in the world, but they're not godly. That is why we have a lot of challenges in the country. That is my thought.